There are many reasons why we gather as a community. Sometimes we gather to commemorate. Sometimes we come. And today we're also here to show our strength as a community. We are taking advantage of the fact that of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, who we have worked steadfastly with since the onset of the surge in anti-Asian racism. And of course, not new. We're here in San Francisco and in the state of California, where of course this was the epicenter of the anti-Asian movement, anti-immigrant movement. But our community history is more than about victimization. It is a history of resistance. We have rights, and we deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. So with that, make sure to say that we are here in San Francisco, Chinatown, but there are many, many communities represented in San Francisco. We have representation from the Japantown, Bayview, others, Soma, the Tenderloin. So that's really important for me to lift up as well as we create a more inclusive space for everyone. So with that, I would just love to invite Reverend Norman Fong, who is really a beloved interfaith and community leader on vocation.
Good morning. People to say 2 words, and David Chu knows what they are. Turn to the person to your left and right and say, "You're beautiful." You're beautiful. You're beautiful. You're beautiful, Norman. You're beautiful. Oh my gosh. But I'm going to try to be quick because I have another event that actually fits. You all should come. We're going to do a block party at the public housing in Chinatown. Asian Black Solidarity. Wow. And what I learned was that we've been beat up all the time, so we have to organize. I don't want to talk about that. But anyway, what I'm saying is the heart of racism and white supremacy is to make everyone else feel ugly. But that's why I always start off, and then the seniors are feeling because they get beat up too. I always start off with, "You're beautiful," and that helps a lot. I am so proud that you are here, all you big shots from Congress, and your job is to amplify our voices, right? Am I right? Yeah. And anyway, but I also just wanted to welcome you and thank you for joining our struggle. And these are one of the toughest times. Again, I just came back from, I think Taft paid my airfare, just to give credit. I flew, and my first flight in 3 years. I flew all the way to Detroit for just 2 days to do the funeral remembrance for Vincent Chin. And Vincent Chin is the same thing. You know, they hated us just because we look Japanese. Sorry, John, but anyway, you know the history. Oh, you're a filmmaker anyway. So we're gathered in the spirit of creating beauty in our communities. It's supposed to be America beautiful, but I've experienced America the ugly more often. So anyway, power to you in your gathering today. And Rob Bonta, I know you were inaugurated at the I Hotel. I love that, man. Talk about, this used to be Manila Town here. It's gone. Redevelopment. Gosh, I can't believe it. So we're fighting for policies, for solidarity. Our little church, I'm with the Presbyterian Church in Chinatown, the oldest Chinese church in America. And thanks to Russell's help too, we just had a National General Assembly in Louisville, and we got the National Presbyterian Church. Every Presbyterian church in America is going to study Asian hate. and that's the order now. And that's what it takes, whether it's schools, church, whatever. We need everyone to talk about it, but end up with something beautiful, affirming all the residents. So if you want to drop by, it's from 11 to 3. We're going to try to build solidarity with hip-hop to Chinese folk. I don't know, I hope it mixes. And so we blocked off a block on Grant to Stockton, 1 block. That's where the public housing is. Drop by if you want. If you want to see all the mayor and all the local politicians, David Chu, you coming, right? Okay, 12:30 to 1. You know, all the local big shots will be there. So you're invited to join our solidarity after you talk about it and discuss it. You want to see it in action, come on down, all right? One more time, turn to the person to your left and right and say, you're beautiful.
You're beautiful. You're so beautiful.
All right, see you later.
Thank you.
Okay. So glad you're here.
Reverend Fong, you're beautiful. Okay, it really does give me such great pleasure to introduce California State Attorney General, former Assembly member who we worked very closely and has championed the Asian American and Pacific Islander community for decades. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that kind introduction. And good morning, everybody. How are you today?
Good morning.
It's wonderful to be with you, though I wish we didn't have to. But I'm glad that we are here together, supporting one another, coming together in collaboration and partnership to resist, to fight, to act, to push back against the forces of hate. I want to start with a big thank you to all of you who have been doing this work for so long, completely committed to our community, earned the trust of our community and fighting for them every day, and meeting the moment, responding to the call of now to step up and do more, and you're doing it. So let me just say thank you. You're not just lifting up people, and you are saving lives, literally, through the work that you do. Also want to never miss an opportunity to honor and recognize my good friend and my favorite city attorney, David Chu, who is here. When he was an assembly member, he was my favorite assembly member. Whatever he's doing, he's my favorite. So love David Chu, and proud to be here with him. You're lucky to have him in San Francisco, and we're lucky to have him in California. Thank you to Congressmember Meng as well for coming. This might be the first time I've seen you in person. We've done a lot of Zoom meetings on national issues related to API, anti-API hate, and I'm thankful for your energy and your push to be with and in support of so many communities so often in this moment where we need you most. Thank you for the strong voice you have in DC to make sure that we have resources and action to address hate against our community. And you know, let me just share the obvious here, which is that for all of us in this room, this is personal. This is not intellectual. This is not academic. This is about our own lived experiences. All of us, I would gather, bar none, have been the victims of hate, have felt the sting of hate, have been targeted, belittled, attacked because of who we are, how we look, where we're from. And that's why this moment in particular is so painful. And it's not just us. It's not about our own personhood. It's about our loved ones, our community, our brothers and sisters, our children being bullied, our elders not able to do everyday things, go for a walk or go shopping, or and we've seen and felt the pain, murders, attacks, beatings, because of who we are. So I've often said to the API community in this moment, which has been a lot longer than I hoped and wanted it to be, that I see you, I value you, and I am you. And we're going to fight together, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, in this important moment. And you know, we've seen, one of the things that we do in the California Department of Justice is we do our best to collect accurate data to sort of capture the moment and what is happening. And just recently we published some data showing that the incidents of hate generally against all communities have gone up 32% in the last year, 2020 to 2021. For the API community, even more acute, gone up 177.5% in 2021 over 2020, and that was on top of 107% increase the year before. So 107% increase followed by 177.5, and you know, those are shocking numbers, but they're not numbers. Those are people. Those are individuals folks who've been targeted, hurt, attacked. And always important to know and recognize what's behind those statistics. And while painful, what I have taken solace in is the fact that while there has been a surge in hate crimes and hate incidents, there has also been a surge in action, that our community has risen up, fought back, done and doing what we have always done, resisted, fought for justice, fought for change, knowing that we are not on the sidelines, destined to be observers and accept whatever happens, but that we have agency. We are change makers. We can shape the future that we want. It doesn't have to be this way, and we can't accept the unacceptable. And so we've been pushing back and fighting back. One of the statistics that we've also seen is that hate crime charges increased by over 30%. So that is important. It's painful when we all know a hate crime has occurred, but it is not recognized as such. It is not investigated as such. It is not identified as such. And we are sitting here saying that is a hate crime. That person was attacked because they're a member of our community. A hate crime isn't just an attack on an individual. It's an attack on the whole community. And we feel that as a community. So when hate crimes occur, they should be identified and investigated as such and charged as such. And that is happening more, and that's important. In my office, we've also done our best to step up, to be the best partner that we can be. I started the Racial Justice Bureau in my first week in office to fight against racial injustice, to stand against hate, to stand with the API community and all communities that were being targeted because of who they are, where they're from, how they look, how they pray, who they love. And that was very important to us. We've worked with prosecutors throughout the state to make sure that they are investigating and identifying hate crimes as hate crimes. Over 50% of them in the past have not been identified and investigated as such. They've been swept under the rug. We've also encouraged prosecutors to have hate crime units, to work with communities that are impacted, to partner, to collaborate, and work together. And we created our CARE unit, Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement, headed by the incredible Kat New, who's over here working, to reach out, to work with, sit with community members and co-create solutions as we go forward. So let me just end with this, that it's important, as you all know, to turn pain into action, to turn the anger and frustration into transformation, and that's what we're doing. And you know, I have this, since I've been an elected official, I've kept this framed photograph in my office, and I'm going to keep it wherever I go as an elected official, because it's a constant reminder to me. It's a photograph of a hotel lobby in Stockton in the 1920s with a sign, and the sign says, "Positively, no Filipinos allowed." And it reminds me of the struggle that we face, the hate we've endured, the obstacles that have been before us, and it also reminds me of what we've overcome, how far we've come, but also that it's an ongoing continuum. We're never done. We always must fight. We always must push. It's also a reminder to me that in California, we celebrate diversity. We don't just tolerate it. And it is important for us all to know that we're not just allowed, we belong. This is our state. This is our home. We are an integral part of the fabric here. And that also we need each other. I've been thinking a lot during COVID and during the pandemic of hate of Martin Luther King Jr.'s phrase from a letter from a Birmingham City jail, that we're in an inescapable network of mutuality, a single garment of destiny. To me, that boils down to we need each other. We're going to rise together or not at all. We're going to fight side by side and co-create our shared future, or we're going to suffer and fail. So solidarity is important. Asian Americans for Black Lives is really important. Supporting all of our communities that are suffering in this moment. So I appreciate all you do. Let me end where I started, with a huge thank you. Thanks for stepping up. Thanks for stepping in. Thanks for being there for our community. You've done it every day. Sleeves rolled up, heads down, doing the work, but it's never the wrong time to say thank you for all you do, and I'm proud to fight with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Attorney General Bonta, for joining us this morning. What I wanted to do is start by acknowledging our host today. So I did mention that CAPAC is one of the hosts, and we want to thank, again, Representative Grace Meng, Vice Chair of CAPAC. Also want to thank TAF, the Asian American Foundation, Norman Chen, who's here today, the Culture Center for hosting us and allowing us to use this wonderful space. And I'd like to, at this moment, invite Representative Grace Meng, who, again, is the Vice Chair, and who is really here to listen and hear from the community in terms of our holistic response. And I did want to just share that in the early days when we were starting Stop API Hate, we worked very closely with CAPAC, including the other caucuses, the Black and Hispanic caucus, to really condemn and denounce. And since that time, they have not only just condemned, but worked actively to address hate in this country. So with that, I'd love to warmly welcome Representative Meng.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Cynthia, for the introduction. And, I just love today's theme, From Community to Congress, because that's really what we need to be doing here in California and all across the country. And we have seen our community do this in unprecedented and newer ways. And I think that throughout the pain that our community has faced, that is something beautiful that has come forth during this tough 2 years. I want to say a special thank you to some of our convening organizations, Stop AAPI Hate, Chinese for Affirmative Action, TAF, and my fellow panelists for doing the amazing work that you are doing, the hard work that often goes underappreciated. As elected officials and public servants, we get a lot of credit for the work that we do. We get a lot of public thank yous. We get criticism too, but we are shown a lot of appreciation. But the folks that are really doing the work on the ground are the people who are with me on this panel, and many of you in the audience and who are watching. And you don't always, sometimes never, get sufficient appreciation and thank you. And so I just wanted to be here on behalf of my colleagues in CAPAC to say thank you to all of you. To my colleagues in government, very grateful to be here in your hometown, incredibly proud of your efforts. To some of our local elected officials, Supervisors Chan and Mar, thank you for hosting us. To some of our superstars who, I think the last time I saw you guys was before you were promoted to AG Banta. We are just watching and beaming with pride from around the country at your success. So thank you for stepping up. To my friend, City Attorney David Chu, we've been here in the same room for about 10 minutes, and we've really brainstormed on ways that we can work together across the country, and we're incredibly proud of your successes as well. I know, AG Banta mentioned earlier, it's been a really tough 2 years for Americans across the country, and it's been an especially tough 2 years for our community. We have community members who are literally scared to leave their homes, right? And this is something that we are hearing and we feel every single day. And it has been really painful. And one thing that I have seen that is important for us to come out of this is that we need to strengthen our national network, right? When something is happening in a certain state or a certain part of the country, when there's a local group or elected official working on a certain issue, we have to have a stronger and more efficient network to be able to use the resources that we have to be able to leverage them for our community, to provide the most resources and the most help as quickly as possible for our community. And we have seen this progress in the last few years. So as painful as it has been, we have seen progress in our community. We have, and I don't want to say that our community is finally speaking up, because that's not really true. We have been speaking up for a long, long time. But it's that the powers that be have not really paid attention. They have treated us largely as invisible. But, even in Congress, I remember the first time that our Judiciary Committee had a hearing about combating Asian hate. Like and I'm sure so many people, I turned off my computer screen, it was on Zoom, because I was like, oh my gosh, this place where I work, Congress, they actually care enough about our community right now to be holding a congressional hearing that is being broadcast live and publicly around the country, around the world. And that was the first time in my almost 10 years that I really felt that, wow, this place, they care about Asian Americans, right? And I can kind of count the number of times where I felt that. And so I think that through the pain, we have learned to not only for people to pay more attention to our needs and our concerns and our hurt, but we have also learned how to strengthen the coalitions that have been built. With passing legislation in Congress, with working on these issues, with the hearing that we had, it would not have been possible with just our Congressional Asian Caucus members alone. There's only still 21 of us. As fast as we are growing, there's only 21 of us. But it was through the coalition and the strengthening of relationships with our other caucuses, the Black Caucus, Hispanic Caucus, LGBTQ members, Muslim communities and organizations around the country, et cetera, who made it possible for us to get some work done to help our community. And lastly, I'm really here to listen. I'm already taking notes on ways that we can bring back to Washington and also selfishly to my home state of New York, ways that the community organizations here have worked together on the ground really in unprecedented ways. I know that the work feels really hard for all of you sometimes, but know that you are making progress and you are making headlines. And I don't say that just for the sake of, yay, you got a headline, but that has impact and influence on our communities all around the country. And it helps us to share best practices that will literally help our communities help save lives. And that's incredibly important. And, so the work that all of you have done, I just, from the early days, think of the work that groups like Stop AAPI Hate has done. Can you imagine if Stop AAPI Hate had not kept track or had not taken down recordings of the incidents that have been happening around the country? So many reporters and articles would not really have paid attention to us because sometimes without data, without numbers, and without proof, we're just not getting the attention that we need and we deserve. And last thing for real, we have to pay attention to numbers because they're important. We can't fix a problem, we can't mend a problem until we can measure it. And it was not until Atlanta happened where I talked to some of our young Asian American staffers on the Hill, and one of them came up to me and they said, I'm the only Asian American who works in my congressional office, and my colleagues came up to me after Atlanta and said, oh, I didn't know that you guys were being targeted. I didn't know that people were attacking you and harassing you and bullying you. So without numbers, we can't just assume that everyone knows what's going on. We can't always depend on a video that happens to have been recorded and gone viral, and that's why we need to continue to push to collect the data. But anyway, I've gone too long, got too excited up here to see all of you. But I'll be around, obviously, for the roundtable, but thank you so much for all the great work that you do.
We are very much looking forward to the roundtable discussion with you, Representative Meng. Now I'd like to invite the president and CEO of the Asian American Foundation. It's about a year old, and it's a foundation that initially supported Stop API Hate, and we want to just thank you for your initial support and your continued work. So Norman, please.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Representative Grace Meng and as well as our partners Stop AAPI Hate and Chinese for Affirmative Action for bringing us together today. Thank you all. As some of you know, TAF launched in the wake of the Atlanta spa shootings about a year ago. Born from this tragedy, our mission is not only to fight AAPI hate and violence, but also to promote belonging and prosperity for our communities. In the area of anti-hate, we have committed over $6 million over the past year to work in all 4 critical areas of anti-hate: response, tracking, protection, and prevention. And I'll go through each of these. Within response, we have established partnerships with 13 organizations to establish an anti-hate national network to provide greater resources for survivors and communities facing anti-AAPI hate. The original anchors for our national network are our 3 action centers in Oakland, Chicago, and New York. We have worked with leading local organizations such as Asian Health Services. We have Julia Liu and Ben Wang here today, Chinese American Service League, and the Asian American Federation, respectively. Overlaid on top of these 3 action centers is a national network, as mentioned, of experts in their respective fields, including Act to Change, SALDEF, the Sikh Coalition, Interfaith America, NAPABA, and others that share their expertise in addressing bullying, fighting hate against our community, and promoting legal support to survivors. TAF understands that survivors need support in a multitude of areas, including medical, emotional, financial, legal, and even transportation and translation sometimes. To provide immediate financial assistance to survivors and their families, we have also created a $500,000 AAPI Emergency Relief Fund in partnership with GoFundMe. Within the tracking area, we have created a tool called Decoding Hate to track anti-AAPI hate attacks reported on Twitter and on news feeds. Through this tool, we have tracked over 7,800 hate incidents via Twitter and news sources, and are now pleased to be collaborating with Stop AAPI Hate to combine and compare our data with their own. To protect AAPIs and communities, TAF has invested in programs that include bystander training in multiple languages and also ambassador escort programs. In New York City, TAF has supported the Asian American Federation to expand its Hope Against Hate campaign to support ambassador escort groups, expand self-defense and safety upstander training, retain staff, and also to create a victim fund there. Under prevention, we're working on longer-term solutions via data and research, education, and narrative change to track and shape attitudes and perceptions towards our communities. Our current data from the Status Index shows in stark terms how we are invisible, othered, and dehumanized in American society today, contributing to this epidemic of hate towards our community. On the positive side, our research also shows that people across the country of all races and backgrounds see the importance of education about AAPI history to address anti-AAPI hate, and also, encouragingly, want to see more AAPI in TV and movies. In January, I attended the 1-year anniversary of the murder of Thai grandfather Vicha Ratanapakdee here in San Francisco. I had the opportunity to meet the family and honor their memory of Kun Ratanapakdee. Their bravery and strength to continue to share the story of his life and death are an inspiration for us to do all we can to prevent such senseless attacks in the future. Our work has just begun, and I want to express my deep appreciation to each of you here in this room for your leadership and tireless efforts for our community. We look forward to working with you to continue to address anti-AAPI hate and build belonging and prosperity in the Bay Area and around the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Norman. And the next set of speakers, we wanted to really showcase and highlight examples of when elected officials work closely with community, examples of good government. And so it is my pleasure to introduce City Attorney David Chu, who was also former Assembly member, who worked really closely with us in some of the state advocacy efforts. So David, please join us.
Good morning. I want to just start by echoing Norman Fong's comments, and I've been reflecting on why, when he says you're beautiful, it always impacts us, in part because the rest of the world looks at our faces, sees our complexions, and treats us the same, doesn't see our individuality, doesn't see that we are all beautiful. And when I look out onto each and every one of you, even with our masks on, this is a beautiful crowd. Every single one of you has been one of those points of change. And each of you has a vision and an energy that collectively, when we bring it together in this room, is powerful. I also want to thank not just the community groups who are here, but our fellow elected officials, and I have to return the favor to our Attorney General Bonta. I have to say that when he left the legislature and when I left the legislature, I was super bummed that we were not going to be able to work together as closely as we used to, but we still get to with our lawyers and with our positions. So thank you so much for being part of this gathering. And let me also start by saying to our Congresswoman, thank you for your leadership. No one has yet mentioned your authorship of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. And you have been just such an incredible champion. But I will also add, she not only authors these amazing bills, but she returns last-minute phone calls to little state legislators who are trying to figure out how to navigate the national system. And I just appreciate your leadership. So I was asked to take 2 minutes to sketch out, if I could, what would I say to CAPAC and our congressional leaders at this moment. I'm just going to really highlight 3 quick things, and they're all on the same theme. First of all, you are here in this city, in this region, that is ground zero for the history of the Asian American community. We stand in the oldest Chinatown in America, with all due respect to New York City, who's just a few years younger than ours. We stand just a few minutes away from the oldest Japantown in the United States, from our little Saigon. We stand in the midst of the former Manila town on the same block as the fall of the International Hotel, which was such an incredible moment in our Asian American history when things seemed dark, but then they became better. I'll also say that at this moment, this region has been ground zero for anti-Asian hate. In the mid-century of the 19th century, Chinatown formed because of anti-Asian hate. And it was actually a couple decades later that the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, that our supervisors who were here, Gord Marr and Connie Chan and myself, that we served on decades ago, that body was among the first that passed anti-Asian laws. And within a few years, the body that Rob Bonta and I served on was one of the first to pass anti-Asian laws. Fast forward to the 1940s, when Japantown was literally decimated, when our residents were arrested and thrown into Japanese American internment camps. And then fast forward to today, when all I can think about this moment are the physical blocks where we have had horrific anti-Asian hate crimes. And I think about the fact that it's in this very small business community of Chinatown that we saw a dramatic drop in business before a single case of COVID-19 was documented in the state of California. We are ground zero. But let me also say that, as our Attorney General said, we have been ground zero, this community, for rising up against that hate. When Cynthia Choi and Vincent Pan team up with Russell Jung to say, we need to document what's going on with Stop API Hate, the dialogue changes. When all of the groups who are here rise up to say to City Hall, we need to pass a budget this year that has a record level of investment in our community, things change, and I know they'll talk about it. I also mentioned last year when I was serving in the legislature, as I was the outgoing chair of the API Legislative Caucus, 150 community-based organizations came together and said to those of us who were your state leaders, you need to invest in our communities. And in part because of that work, teaming up with 12 Democrats of Asian American descent in the legislature, we passed the largest investment in our Asian community, not just in California's history, but in our country. $165 million to victims, to innovative new public safety programs, to students, to collecting data, to ethnic media. This all happens because we come together. And the final thing I will say to the Congresswoman as you carry our message back to your colleagues is we are stronger together. We know that. And I would say if we have to set one goal, it's not just that these numbers have to come down. We have to make sure that this time in history is never, ever replicated again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, City Attorney Chu. I'd like to invite our supervisor, Connie Chan, who has been a champion. Oh, not here, okay. Well, in that case, I would love to invite Supervisor Gordon Marr, who we've worked very closely in developing local responses, including investments in community-based organizations on the front lines responding to hate and a whole host of other issues of equity. Gordon?
Thank you so much, Sin, and I am so grateful to be able to be here today with all of you for this very important community conversation around addressing hate and violence impacting our AAPI communities. Thank you so much to Stop AAPI Hate, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, the Asian American Foundation for really organizing this important event. And yeah, and really thank you to all of our amazing community activists and leaders, really our community superheroes that are going to be participating in the roundtable discussion, and to our trailblazing congressional leader, Representative Mang. This discussion today really is part of an ongoing process that we've been going through here in San Francisco, and it's been happening around the country over the past few years to grapple with the rise of hate and violence directed at the AAPI communities. And it's been a challenging process here, as it has everywhere. At times, this process here in San Francisco has been tremendously inspiring. We've seen a huge upsurge in civic engagement and really activism from regular folks, families and seniors and young people that to get involved in marches, rallies, and other advocacy efforts. And these are folks that have never, for the most part, never been involved or spoken out about social issues before. So it's been very inspiring. In my district, on the far west side of San Francisco in the Sunset District, we had a really inspiring and really historic march to stop AAPI hate out on the Great Highway Promenade. That was amazing last year. And I would add that followed an even more historic march, a number of marches that we had in my district on the Great Highway Promenade in solidarity with Black Lives Matter in the months before it. But at times, this process here has also been very challenging and even disturbing, I think. We've seen a strong community sentiment that's very understandable in focusing on simplistic solutions to these problems and increased law enforcement and incarceration. And that's very understandable. But I think everyone here understands that it's going to take more than law enforcement and increased incarceration to really address, these challenging issues. And then we've also seen, I think, more troubling, racial profiling and blaming of other communities of color for this problem that really sets us back, as a community and a society. So. But I do think that this process that we've been going through, though, has been certainly been very important here in San Francisco and ultimately very productive. And I really want to thank all of the activists and leaders here in the room today and others for really pushing us, our local government, our state government, and our federal government to really address these issues in a meaningful way. And so this conversation today, I think, is another step forward in that process. And then finally, I did want to say that I think we're all very aware that these violence and hate directed at our communities are not limited to our communities. And in fact, these are problems plaguing, so many other communities of color, and vulnerable communities in our city and our country right now. And in fact, the hate crime statistics locally and statewide consistently show that African Americans are the most targeted and victimized by hate crimes in our city and our state. And finally, I just wanted to share a personal reflection. I'm up for re-election in November, and politics in our city can be brutal and intense. But last weekend, I was really the subject of just an extreme political attack that was very hateful but it wasn't based on my race, my personal race and ethnicity. It was based on my strong allyship with the LGBTQ community in San Francisco and in our country. And it was also based on my support for building affordable housing in my district, the first ever affordable housing for low-income families that will hopefully include more diverse residents, African-American and Latino families in the Sunset District. So, so I just wanted to raise that, and so again, this attack that was leveled against me was absolutely homophobic. It was racist, more directed at African-American and Latino families, and my support, for these issues, and it was classist as well. So I thank everyone here, for taking a comprehensive and broad perspective on how we can really address these issues, how we can ensure that the AAPI communities are safe and secure, and how we could ensure safety and justice for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Marr, for your message of intersectional solidarity. It's really important, especially now. And now I'd like to invite Supervisor Connie Chan, who has been a champion for making sure that all communities in San Francisco are safe and have their basic needs being met.
Thank you. It's good to be with you here today and having this conversation and being part of this dialogue. I think that I have been serving in San Francisco, doing organizing work, and also in working as a legislative aide at City Hall and for different city departments, including the district attorney's office when our then district attorney was Kamala Harris, and also have worked in city departments like Recreation and Park Department and City College of San Francisco. And let me just say that, in San Francisco, even as progressive as we always has been, and I would say that it's part of this coalition, what we see, a rainbow coalition then, right? And that was the time when we saw, like, Reverend Jesse Jackson was here, stands shoulder to shoulder with so many, I think, the Asian American leaders before us. I think some of them are still among us today, and still continuing this work. But even then, we see that today under this climate, especially during pandemic, that anti-Asian attacks has significantly increased. But I also think that they're just more visible to many of us, even though this really has long existed for a long time, is because now everyone has one of these, the smartphones, that they're now recorded. They are, everywhere that every one of us has the opportunity to finally face this and record this and share with one another in a different platform on social media. While that is great, because then that really raised awareness to a whole different level. But once that information is out there, I think that actually changed the dynamics of those conversations and allows a lot of information and stir up a lot of anger and anxiety. And I think that this is why that this dialogue and this roundtable is important. We've got to put these things in context. How do we as Asian American leaders to put these incidents and put these communications into context for all communities, especially for communities of color? And we gotta face that reality to say that, there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of anger out there. And so how do we channel that to make sure that we bridge it? And I have to say, dialogue like this is great. I think that it is time for us to start thinking about how do we bridge this dialogue among all communities of color. How do we do this united and stand united together? And that is not just us as Asian community, but it's communities of color. How do we understand that the hate against us is the hate against all communities of color because of the system that we all suffer together? And so how do we channel that, and how do we have frankly, an honest conversation among ourselves? And also let me just also bring it back, not just among the communities of color, meaning the Black and brown community, the BIPOC community, and Asian community, but even among ourselves as Asian Americans, that let's also have a very honest conversation that the divisiveness sometimes can grow. Really, like, what is Asian Americans? Like, let's also be honest about that and think about that is a term that is pushed upon us because we are the other. And let's also break that down among ourselves to say, how do we then identify ourselves as Asian American, but also much, much more. We're not monolithic in our culture and in our language. We may come from Asia because of our ethnicity and heritage, but really we're so much more than that. And how do we even communicate among ourselves? Because I think sometimes that we also misunderstand each other. We don't understand each other as much as we should, and therefore we cannot stand united against hate and just be protecting each other's culture, protecting each other's language, protecting each other's heritage, and to say that, when we see hate against one of us, and that we can immediately call it out. And I think that is another challenge about not calling it out. And it takes a lot of courage, I'm not gonna lie. I think that Supervisor Marr knows that, especially what he brought it up. It's not easy when you're out there and alone, and to say, you know what, I don't just speak for me, I am now coming as a community. And that responsibility is on your shoulder. And in fact, it's on all our shoulder. And I applaud every single one of you today to engage in this actually very challenging conversation in a very difficult time. So I'm grateful for all of you to be here, but I really hope that today the results of this conversation will actually go much further beyond and start bridging beyond the communities of color and really deliver the education and the outreach that we need to do the next step. How do we bridge the conversation beyond this room and going into the community? And last but not least, I want to share with you this thought when I talk about recognizing among ourselves and other people that we're not monolithic. I also think that for Asian American community to recognize that there is a language and cultural gap, not just among Asian Americans, but immigrants, community, and those that the older generation of immigrants or immigrants have been here for a long time. Our experience of United States or California, and in fact, San Francisco is very different. So then how do we too bridge that conversation among those that some of us who was born here, may not be able to speak the language that their grandparents speak. And how do we then bridge that conversation in a way that there's generation gap too, and there is that language gap and somewhat of a culture gap, right? And so how do we do that? And so I again urge all of us to say there's many, many layers to this conversation, and let's not fall in the trap to just be, stop Asian American hate. There are just so many layers of it, and there's a lot of work to do. And I'm grateful to be part of this conversation, and I'm grateful to be part of this movement that we must continue and push forward. Thank you.
What a wonderful segue to the heart of our program tonight, which is our roundtable discussion. One of the things that I wanted to do as I frame this roundtable discussion is that when we think about community safety and transformation, it really is not just the absence of violence. It's about the presence of economic opportunity. It is about ensuring that every person has job security, that has housing security, their physical and mental health needs being made, that we have social cohesion and we build a caring community. And so today's roundtable reflects the diversity that Supervisor Chan was speaking about. And it's also wanting to highlight the importance of looking at both interpersonal and institutional forms of harm and the robust set of responses that I'm so proud to highlight with today's roundtable. But since we started off with the importance of data and advocacy, I did want to invite Russell Jung, who is our partner at Stop API Hate, who is a professor at SF State University, Asian American Studies, and is somebody that I got reconnected with when he was tracking media accounts of our community being discriminated, racially profiled, and in some cases being attacked. So I just want to acknowledge Russell and to thank him. And he's going to give us an overview as we just released our 2-year report just this Wednesday.
Thanks, Thin. And, you know, as a lecturer or as a professor, I realize you've been sitting for a long time. So if you all want to stand up and get some food quickly or just stretch, feel free. I know my students wouldn't be able to focus for more than 3 minutes. Congresswoman Meng, thank you for leading us. I just realized you're not only the representative of New York, but you're all our representatives, and we appreciate your leadership during this critical moment. Supervisor Ma, Supervisor Chan, City Attorney Chu. David Chu was there from the very start. He understood this issue immediately. He resonated and helped lead the API Legislative Caucus as we just formed Stop API Hate through his support. Norman Chen, thank you for the Asian American Foundation's efforts, and to all our distinguished committee guests, thank you. On behalf of Stop API Hate, we are grateful for your partnership. We're grateful for your leadership. We're grateful for what you're doing on the ground. I'd like to just sort of share some of the data from our 2-year report that we just issued this week. And we've received 11,500 incidents of hate to date. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. We did a national representative survey, and we found 1 out of 5 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders experienced hate in the last year. That's 4 million cases of hate. And that's why, because it's so widespread, because it's so pervasive, I'm calling this period one of historic collective racial trauma. It's collective because not only, you know, so many of us experience it, but the rest of us experience it vicariously. I hear Attorney General Bonta talking so much about how he's worried about his own mother, right? Just traveling on public transit. And so we're probably more worried about our elders. We're probably more worried about our children than we are about ourselves. And so we're experiencing this trauma vicariously. In our report, actually, if you see it on page 5, there's one case in Washington where a woman was riding the subway and a man just started haranguing her. And he complained, "Why don't you speak English? What are you even doing here?" As if she didn't belong. He accused her of being a Chinese spy. And so this woman looked around, and he was going on for a while. No one stopped to help her. And so she was afraid that she might get attacked physically. And so the only thing she could do was move to the back of the subway. We're facing de facto segregation because of this surge of racism. I know my own mom talks about how she wouldn't go out, that she would only stay on Clement Street because of the violence against us. So this is a period of collective racial trauma. And the woman in the subway, she talked about how scared she was. She talked about how isolated she felt. She talked about how hypervigilant and anxious she was about what this person could do. And that's what I think characterizes our community today. The entire community is having a trauma response. We're fearful, we're hypervigilant, we're anxious, we're angry and depressed. And so I think you'll hear, I mean, I think we know it already, but the question then is, how do we deal with this racial trauma that is so collective? How do we deal with it on a national scale, on a more community scale, rather than on an individual scale? We know from our data that vulnerable groups are facing this trauma in different ways, that there is an intersectional impact, that women, that elderly, that children, that LGBTQ, that working class Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are more vulnerable, and they experience this racism differently. And so we have to attend to those differences. And the trauma that we're experiencing aren't solely from hate crimes. Only 1 out of 6 of our incidents are of physical assaults, and you know that it's really difficult, as Attorney General Bonta would say, it's really difficult to prosecute hate crimes. Rather, 2/3 of our cases deal with harassment, but they're still traumatizing. 11% of our cases are civil rights violations, so we're getting mistreated at the workplace. 9% of our cases are online, so our youth who are on screens a lot are experiencing this trauma indirectly. So the racism is pervasive and it's widespread, but it's also broad in its impact, broad in how we're experiencing it. To respond to these trends, Stop API Hate is promoting 3 broad initiatives that we'd like you to bring back to Washington. And we think these initiatives are comprehensive, that they're preventative, and they're multiracial in benefit. And so this approach, we think, has been being used here in San Francisco and the Bay Area, and we think should be a national model. First, like as most Americans recommend, as Norman pointed out, we're fighting racism and advocating for education. We want to require Asian American narratives to be in our curricula. We're also seeking the expansion of our civil rights protections. And in California, we have 3 innovative bills to stop street harassment that is so much and so sadly the norm. And finally, we're insisting on the safeguarding of the well-being and safety of everyone in our neighborhoods through community-based solutions, not carceral solutions, but rather community-based solutions that you'll see offered by the groups today. So although I've been so distressed by the racial trauma in our communities, I really see these 3 initiatives already being implemented across the nation, and that's the amazing thing. Within 2 years, not only have we experienced racial trauma, but we've seen a global movement develop. Not only has BTS posted Stop API Hate, and that's the most retweeted post in the world, but we've seen 17 states have passed or have pending legislation for Asian American curriculum. That's a broad grassroots movement nationally. And so we have to target swing states in Georgia and Virginia now to really support Asian Americans who value education and want our narratives in the curriculum. Our civil rights bills have gone bipartisan support. They're authored by Black and Latina legislators, and I think addressing harassment, again, deals with the bulk of racism, and we're treating it as a public health issue, to recognize that racism harms everybody, both the perpetrator and the victims, and we need to take a public health approach that goes upstream to prevent it. And finally, as Assemblymember Chu, or City Attorney Chu talked about, over 80 organizations in California have now benefited and received funding from the API Equity Budget Bill. New York passed a similar bill, Massachusetts did too. And so we see this movement of Asian Americans, of Pacific Islanders from all walks of life standing up. And in the last 2 years, we're not only experiencing a historic period of racial trauma, we're seeing now a historic period of racial change. We're seeing a period of institutional change galvanized by the Asian American movement, by the Pacific Islander movement. So I just congratulate all of us here. We need to continue this movement, to follow and support our leaders, but really to listen from the grassroots, to listen to our communities, to see how we can develop solutions together. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to start our roundtable dialogue. So I'm going to start by introducing our speakers. To my far left is Shasan Liu with Chinese Progressive Association, Jenny Lung with the Chinese Culture Center, and then Gainoran Siataga from SALT, Pacific Islander Coalition. We also have Zara Balou with the Council for Arab American, Zara, you're going to be so mad at me. Council on American Islamic Relations, SF. Okay. My apologies. I just call her CARE, SF CARE. Okay. And then here we've already introduced Representative Meng, Fauga Maliga Pulit.
You got it. Keep going. You got it.
Pulatasi, elected member as SFD CCC and former VP of SF Board of Education. And then we have John Osaki with Japanese Community Youth Council. And then Sarah Wan is going to be joining us very shortly. She's coming from another event, so we'll be hearing from her. So let me go ahead and get started. And I want to start with Zara. We first met post 9/11, and the issue of racialized rhetoric is obviously nothing new. And in fact, it has been mainstreamed, if you will. We have an issue of misinformation and disinformation, racial profiling, and obviously being painted as a national security threat is a theme that we are all too familiar with. And I'm wondering if you could just share more about what that looks like in your community, the role that CARE has been playing, and really, I think, from your own experience leading CARE SF.
Thanks so much, Sin, and really everyone with Stop API Hate, and all of you for being here on a Saturday morning to take on this important but also challenging subject. I wanted to start by sharing two brief stories. One of them is from a young woman who contacted us recently, Yasmin, an 18-year-old Palestinian-American Muslim woman. She wrote to me, "I was sitting with my family at my grandfather's restaurant, the Mediterranean Grill House in downtown Mountain View, and left by myself to go down the street and get boba." Yes, an intersectional story, somewhat. On my way back, I saw a lady crossing the street coming towards me. She seemed to be walking very fast. I thought nothing of it and continued crossing the street on my side, and we ended up meeting at the corner with me ahead of her. She tapped me on my shoulder and proceeded to pin me to the wall and start choking me with my hijab. She stared at me and said nothing while I'm screaming, "What is wrong with you? Get off me. Someone help me. She's choking me." After struggling, I got one of my hands free, took the drink, and threw it towards her and continued to push her off. Once the bystanders started coming towards us and yelling at her to get off, she finally left me alone. She proceeded to yell, "You're a terrorist," over and over again. I then had people saying, "You're safe and come with me to get away." I called my father screaming and crying, "Come help me." She choked me and gave him my location. This was right outside of her grandfather's restaurant, right here in the Bay Area. With the help of courageous bystanders, her family, and local law enforcement, this woman's assailant was arrested and has been charged with battery as well, and is also looking at a hate crimes enhancement. This is a good example. I want to be able to tell people like Yasmin, call law enforcement and trust your community to help you. However, the second story I'll share is a personal one. After more than a decade of work in civil rights and 2 decades as an activist, particularly assisting people with federal law enforcement harassment, my family and I have been targeted by federal law enforcement at borders and airports more than 6 times this year alone. Just 2 days after receiving this woman's email and being grateful for the way in which law enforcement interacted with her, my family and I were threatened at the Vancouver pre-clearance site coming back into the US that if we did not answer invasive questions about who we saw, what we did, what we do for work, who we work with, and all of our past travel for the past 5 years, that we would be barred from flying back into the US, despite being US citizens. The officer said to us, "Answer our questions or we will make you miss your flights." We said, "But we have a right to enter the US," and they said, "Yes, you can drive from Vancouver to your home in California. That is what you have a right to do." The hate that our communities face is in many instances discussed in the context of interpersonal interactions. Our work at CARE has taught us over the years that what we face is global in nature, that it is intersectional, that it is systemic, and that we must work on it together. Global in nature, because though these examples I've given you are very, very based and rooted in California, the Muslim community here consistently observes state-sanctioned violence against fellow Muslims in India, in China, in Palestine, in Burma, and the list goes on. It's intersectional because I'm sitting here at a table with people from various backgrounds, and I'm actually very grateful to Stop API Hate for ensuring that we weren't just calling it intersectional, we were building an intersectional panel. The Muslim community experience is one of many as compared to the Japanese American experience, the Chinese American experience, the Black and Latin experience. These experiences are shared. The people who hate me generally hate everyone sitting in this room. And the government agencies that we should be able to turn to protect us, but who often also betray us, betray all of us together. Interpersonal hate crimes are but one symptom of what we are seeing in terms of broad brush violence against our communities. The systemic nature with which our communities are targeted encourages people on the streets to bully, harass, and commit violence against us. When they hear from elected officials that our communities should be targeted, that our communities cannot be trusted, that our communities are to blame for things, of course they're going to yell at that grandmother on the street. Of course they're going to attack that young woman on the street. Of course they are going to fire them from their places of employment without thinking twice. I note that last year alone, CARE California received nearly twice as many complaints about law enforcement harassment as we did of people complaining of hate crimes and hate incidents. So while Yasmin was lucky to have the police's help, can I feel safe and secure advising future Yasmins to call the police? We know that just about every major law enforcement agency in the Bay Area has faced scandals with police officers themselves engaging in racist behavior. Only San Francisco's police department and Oakland's have drawn clear lines in the sand about the ways in which they'll interact with the FBI so as to not violate the rights of Arab, Muslim, and South Asian communities. We know that sheriffs across the region are collaborating with ICE. The list goes on. And so when we're working on hate crimes and hate incidents, I urge us to think more broadly about how the systems that we operate in perpetuate this. You'll hear from some of our fellow speakers today, not just about the national security lens that I bring, but also in the ways in which economic resources are distributed and how that makes a difference. Many of us, of course, have been following how immigration impacts our communities differently. In my own community, I see how Afghans, thousands of Afghans, have come to the US simply trying to collect on the promise that the US military made them. Help us as we invade your country, and we will keep you safe. A problematic promise, of course, but while trying to collect on it, hurdle after hurdle after hurdle, while our federal officials tell us this cannot be solved, and at the same time, make it so easy for Ukrainians to come to the US and move through the process with zero obstacles. So it's global, it's intersectional, it's systemic, and it's right here. That story was from Mountain View. I was trying to return to California. We are not immune, even in the most progressive parts of our country. So how do we move forward? Despite fear of law enforcement, we need to encourage our communities to report these incidents and these crimes. Where they cannot report to law enforcement, they should report to Stop API Hate. They should report to CARE. They should report to whomever they feel comfortable reporting to, because as Representative Meng said, we cannot solve a problem if we cannot quantify it. We need to train our allies. The people that stepped forward to protect Yasmin are people like all of us. They had to know what to do, they had to know how to do it safely, and they had to know how to do it in the absence of being able to rely on anyone or anything else. And so we train bystanders to intervene, to become upstanders. We have to hold law enforcement accountable to actually protect us, to actually protect the most marginalized, to be held to the highest standards, and to ensure that they are not harming us in the meantime. And then we have to work together. Our experiences are shared. I don't take for granted that the first groups to invite the Muslim community forward post 9/11 were Japanese American groups, or that today I sit here as a guest in the Chinese Cultural Center. We have to work together because the people that hate us are. And so we need to overcome them by coming together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm going to come back to you about models of care that your community has developed. So, Foga, I want to turn to you because I know that you've been very vocal about standing in solidarity with the Asian community, but very clear about the Pacific Islander community and specifically the Samoan community, how you experience hate and violence differently. And I'd love for you to just elaborate on that for us.
Yeah. So thank you for having us at the table today. You know, I'm from this city, and you know, I'm Pacific Islander, I'm Samoan. And when the Asian hate stuff popped off, you know, throughout the country, it was AAPI, right? And let's be honest, right? Let's be honest. Most Samoans in this city, Pacific Islanders, are like, well, you know, what we're seeing in the media is not Pacific Islanders, right? I'm not saying that to drive a wedge between us, right? I'm just saying, you know, it was hard for folks to relate, right? But we understood and we stand in solidarity, right? So for me, what's really important, you know, some of what we're seeing in the media today, it really is an attack, what we're seeing, you know, through social media and stuff, on our Asian American folks, right? And for us as AAPIs, you know, for some reason, you know, we've been all grouped together, political, you know, geographics and so, you know, so we're kind of like all together, and it makes it seem like we're all like one big family, right? But really, you know, we're all very separate from different regions of the globe, right? I was looking at all our last names at the table. I was like, this is super cool, right? Like, yeah, Japan, you got American Samoa, you got, you know, everywhere, right? But we all have different stories, and I think sometimes what happens is, and I'll get to where I'm trying to get to is, you know, and people have thrown it around, you know, it's, when it comes to the AAPI, you know, group, some of the issues that are happening in terms of like this cause around violence, right? How do we lift it all up, right? How do we use this opportunity to lift it all up, right? You know, when I was on the school board, I went to 3 funerals. Pacific Islander Samoan kids were killed in this city. Killed, murdered. Let's say murdered by guns, right? So I was like, oh, this is interesting, right? There was also an individual, you know, and an adult, you know, he was also shot and killed. So the violence is very different, you know, for Pacific Islanders, and for us, it's kind of like, well, you know, how do we like, you know, bring it all together, relate, you know, how do we move with this movement? Right now, we stand in solidarity with the issue, for sure. Hate is hate throughout the whole entire spectrum, right? But when you come to us as, you know, AAPIs, right, like for us, it's like, you know, how do we look at it on a spectrum to be able to address each issue, right? And so I think it's really important, you know, because if we're gonna be on a front facing, you know, saying that, you know, it's AAPI hate, what does that actually look like for all of us, you know, and what is actually our mission, right? And how do we actually address it from a way that, you know, touches on points on everyone. And everyone in this room, for sure, 100% I know is on the same page, and we all stand in solidarity. But that is the conversation that is happening in communities, right? That is what people are saying. That's what my mother and my brothers and like, that's not us, son. Let's turn the TV off, right? No, that's not what we're actually trying to get to, right? So how do we bridge that gap, right? So, you know, we got a couple of PIs in the room as well, you know, and I'm pretty sure they share the same sentiment, you know, and how do we move forward together, right? And like, you know, and I love what some of the electeds and Rob and everybody was saying, because it really is a human thing, right? Like it's, you know, the pain is pain, and hurt is hurt, and hate is hate all across, right? And it's just not right at all, right? But this is a good time for us to really focus in. And I want to say again, like we're here at the table, you know, to one, have this conversation, and I don't want to take away, because when you look at the AAPI, it's those 4 letters, right? That PI it really is the AA, right? And so I don't want to take away from like what's really happening to our Asian community, because that stuff is wrong. I grew up in this city, and I understand, you know, from a plain perspective and from the common folks, right? Like, you see it in schools every day. The hate that is occurring, you know, towards our, you know, Chinese students. I've seen it growing up. Let's just all be real, right? I used to go on the bus and I used to be like, man, this sucks. You know, like, this is not right. It is as plain and simple as that. It's not complicated at all, right? And so, and you know, vice versa. They see what's happening with the PI kids, you know, the PI families. Like, we're experiencing it in a very also different way, like systemically, you know, neglect, there's passive racism, right? Like, there's, you know, people talk about inclusion, but I also want to throw the word out there of acceptance, right? You can include us, but do you accept us in this movement moving forward, right? But, you know, that's, you know, just kind of my thoughts around that, and I'm looking forward to, you know, sharing more stuff that we've been actually doing here in San Francisco to actually lift up some of the work that we've been doing around supporting NHPIs and addressing some of the crucial issues that are happening in the community. So happy to be here.
Thank you.
Karen, I wonder if you'd like to follow up about the, in many ways, different levels of invisibility and what you all are trying to build with your latest initiative.
Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. Yes, it's been a long time coming. I know many of you have grew up with us, saw us. We've broken bread together, went to the same schools together. And when I think of everything that has just been shared today, and I think of our Pacific Islanders, you know, a lot, and I'm gonna be very transparent, people can look at us and say, man, because of our size, because of the color of our skin, or we're very aggressive, we're intimidating. But most of us are the biggest hearted people that you guys would ever get to meet if you ever gave us the opportunity to know us. And some of you guys do know us, and you know this. And so today, you know, I'm a born and raised native of San Francisco. I'm very proud to be here from the city. One thing that I was very prideful of is I didn't care what race you were. It wasn't about race for me. It's like, if you're cool, I'm cool. I didn't care what hood you were from, as long as there was that one part, and that was respect. And so, as now, you know, and I have to be transparent, in the last few years since gentrification, displacement, you know, we started also seeing the rise in racism. It started to be more open, and for me, I didn't really experience it like that, or maybe I didn't, you know, trip or open my own eyes, right? Maybe I was oblivious to racism, but then as Asian American Pacific Islander hate started occurring, a lot of folks says, well, you know, our Pacific Islanders don't have to worry, we're the bullies. And he says, no, we actually were bullied too. And that's why we were defending ourselves. We're bullied because of our size. We're bullied because of our clothes. And most of you guys don't know, we make up, you know, 73% of us live in public housing. 73%. When we go and we bring this, we had to extract our own data. You know, no disrespect to our Asian brothers and sisters, you know, at all. We're lumped up together by government, and that's fine. You know, but then when it comes to, okay, how many Samoans, how many Tongans, how many Fijians, how many Chamorro, we had to go and extract that ourselves. Community, I'm not a data analysis, you know what I'm saying? But we had to learn because we're in this movement, we're in it together. When extracting that, it blew my mind. You know, as a Pacific Islander, here we are working in other communities. I've been in public safety all my life. Personal story real quick is I've been, you know, bullied. I've been shot, I've been stabbed. I'm not gonna say I'm a victim, I'm a survivor. But that's what helps me and my purpose and drive. I would never want anybody to ever go through that. I'm a crisis responder since 18, so the shootings and the stabbings or any violence, not just here locally, but all around, you know, we respond to. And nobody ever knows like how much, like especially for our Pacific Islanders, I'm gonna keep it real. When violence happens to us, and like, you know, Brother Faunga just mentioned, And during the pandemic, we had one of the highest, loss, right, to violence. And we're talking about gun violence. So when responding, we turned around to try to get, support, resources to help. There was none. We had to come to all our other brothers and sisters, Black, Latino, Asian. Hey, can you help us out? So that's definitely one of the biggest challenges, that we may be good enough to do the work. We're good enough to stand there and, work campaigns and get you in the office, but that we're not good enough to invest in and to have us be self-sufficient or sustainable for ourselves. And so what we started was, we got together all these groups, amazing groups, about 14 groups, 12 here. We got, some around the Bay Area. We also have a lot of other groups of folks that have been working 20, 30 years pro bono. Like, I have some folks that work at McDonald's literally full-time, but do this work on the side for 20, 30 years. No funding. Why? Because we're the only ones that can look out for each other. We're the only ones that can understand each other, understand the struggle that we're going through, right? And so with that, we've come together as a coalition. We knew as one group or individual groups, yeah, you might notice us. You'll know Gaynor. You know one of our elders in the room, John Nauer, who's been in this work for so many years. Pastor Sweetie out there. You'll know us, but still, we're not being invested in. We're not getting that actual support, And so right now, this coalition we're very committed and dedicated to making sure that our Pacific Islander voices are being heard, but not just heard, that we're going to be sitting there, we're going to be working together. One thing that Faunga did not mention, there was controversy when the AAPI hate was happening. And a lot of us was being contacted on where we stood. And I got really upset because at the end of the day, people looked at the race and they looked at the color, but they didn't look at what actually happened. So as Faunga and I were, we're talking, I said, no, we have to stand up because we do not condone violence, no matter who it is. I don't care what, and that's where we are, right? And so if we just took all of that out and looked at people as humans, look at people as people, I'm telling you, things would be so much better. If we work together instead of letting the system pin us against each other, like our supervisor Chan was mentioning, like this world would be so much better. We're all blessed with different abilities and different, talents. Together we're so powerful. And so I do lift that and would like to see that. And then moving forward, I would love to see our Pacific Islander people more at the table, and I'll leave it with this. We are finally at the table, and you should see our Pacific Islanders and how happy they get at every little thing that we have, right? Which is not a lot, I'm just keeping it real. Me, I've been privileged to see a lot, But our Pacific Islanders is like, oh my God, we got $5,000, and we get emotional, right? But people don't understand there's more out there, right? And we're here. And I said, and so we have a couple of sayings, we said, no, we're not on the menu no more, we're at the table, and then we're like, we're not the little dog on the corner waiting for that, somebody to throw us a bone. And so this was really big for us today, and I thank everybody that's here, all the organizers, and all of you guys that have included us, and all my brothers and sisters in this fight. Thank you guys for inviting us.
Thank you.
So Representative Meng, I wanted to bring you into the conversation. I know this is all familiar territory for you. The historic lack of governmental philanthropic investments in our community, the fact that within this umbrella, Asian American and Pacific Islander, there are groups that have lesser visibility and in some cases erasure. And I wanted to get your thoughts because I know you've been an advocate for money going directly to community-based organizations, and I know this is an issue in your district as well.
Yeah, first I do want to say thank you so much to all of the panelists and speakers. I've been taking notes, and it really is helpful to hear this such touching and factual testimony from each and every one of you, and I'm grateful for your work. It's so true, right? You know, in the past 2 years especially, people are like, oh, you know, our community's finally speaking up, but like we've mentioned before, we have been speaking up. It's just like people haven't really heard. I'll say that I can probably speak for my other AAPI congressional colleagues that even in Congress, there are so many times when we are in rooms where decisions are being made, policies are being discussed, and they will mention so many other communities but completely omit our AAPI community. And it doesn't just happen once in a blue moon, it happens pretty regularly. You know, we joke sometimes that we should just wear like a pin or a sticker and, you know, remind each other that we have to raise our hands and say, well, don't forget the AAPI community. It's something that happens really regularly. And so we are often frustrated and impatient about the progress that we are making, but at the same time, we come from a point where sometimes it just feels like a struggle where we're not even mentioned, acknowledged, and we're completely invisible. And, you know, we've been invisible in the history textbooks, we've been invisible in the budget books, right, of government at all levels of government, the budget books of the corporate world, philanthropic organizations. We are usually forgotten. And so, you know, this is something that I'm incredibly heartened, especially over the last 2 years, because of the solidarity that has been demonstrated, right? When we're going to the rallies and to the protests, it's not just Asian Americans who are at these events, it's so many other communities who stood up for us and continue to stand with us. And I really think that that is really important. And that's not always an easy discussion to have within our own communities, right? We are not just battling discrimination that may be aimed at our community, but also intolerance that may exist within our own communities as well. And I really believe that we're at a crossroads where we have to have these conversations. And the burden is, unfortunately, but we can do it, the burden is on our shoulders. For many of us who are like first-gen immigrants or children of immigrants, our parents and grandparents didn't necessarily have the tools to be able to advocate for these resources. But now, you know, we sort of have multiple duties. We have to fight for our community and at the same time making sure that we're, you know, building bridges with other communities as well. And a lot of it is making sure that we're not invisible, and that's why stuff like inclusion in curriculum is so important, and the progress that has been made around the country is just tremendous. You know, I have legislation at the national level, but the work really is being done at the state by state level, right? We have a bill that is the beginning process of an AAPI museum in Washington, D.C., but that's going to take a few years, right? But just to have that discussion to remind people, like, hey, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders have been part of this country for a long time, and our stories are just as American as everyone else's.
Thank you. So, John, I want to bring you into the conversation. You have been a longtime leader, really doing pivotal multiracial youth development work. I think also, for those who don't know, you're a filmmaker. I don't know how you managed to do that. And so if you could speak about the power of narrative in ensuring that our voices and experiences are also reflected in the discourse.
Sure. So good morning, everybody. Good morning, Representative Meng. We're very pleased and appreciate you joining us here in San Francisco today. And you know, of course, my family is no stranger to AAPI hate. My father and mother were both incarcerated during World War II, and my father's family resettled in San Francisco once they were finally released from their incarceration. And of course, they settled in San Francisco, Japantown, because that's where they were allowed to live. And they encountered a phenomenon that happened all up and down the West Coast where in many what were previously Japanese American communities, the black community had moved in. And so our communities coexisted for many, many years together. And in the 1960s, when redevelopment, urban renewal was destroying the black community and Japantown, my father was one of the few that stood with the black community to try to resist the destruction of their neighborhood. And you know, what was, my mother would share stories with me periodically about that time, and the work was so intense, right, to try to resist this overwhelming movement that my father actually had to step away from his day job in order to do this work. And my mother wasn't too happy about that because she had 4 boys to feed, and so I think it was very challenging at times, but that's what it took to be involved in multi-ethnic organizing at that time. There were no jobs to do this work, right? You had to choose to do it. And so I want to fast forward to talk a little bit about my organization, because I think it's an interesting example around multi-ethnic solidarity. My organization was founded by young people who are part of the Third World Liberation Front, right? Who organized strikes, student strikes at San Francisco State, UC Berkeley, that created ethnic studies across this country. And what I like to point out about that whole movement was, of course, it was very much characterized by Black, Asian American, Latinx, Native American students coming together, right, for a common purpose. And it was so powerful, right? It, in many ways, changed the way that people learn about our collective histories in this country. And what I also think is very important about that point in time is that I think it was very much noticed, right, by leaders in this country. Of course, I always like to point out that at that time, the governor of California was Ronald Reagan. And from that moment on, he and other members of the dominant white power structure worked very intentionally to divide our communities. And I think that's something that we have to constantly be aware of and think about intentional ways of addressing that, because it has manifested itself in communities being very isolated from each other, being very difficult to work collaboratively. We've talked a lot about communities of color working together, right? But there have been so many ways in which we have been divided and wedges have been created against us. It's very difficult to do. It's much easier to talk about than to actually to do that work. And so with my organization, I think we have been successful at balancing, continuing to serve our community in Japantown, but also doing work in coordination and partnership with other ethnic communities. And so my organization is the lead agency for the oldest youth collaboration in San Francisco that involves the Black community, Latinx community, other Asian ethnic communities, and we work together to serve young people. And let me just say a few things about that. One is that it's not easy, right? It's very difficult work. It requires a lot of commitment to do that. But because of that, we have been working together for decades now. And for a long time, people would ask me questions, why is JCYC serving all these Black kids and Latinx kids and youth from other Asian ethnic communities? And the thing that I would, share with them is that's normal for us, right? That's what we believe, that as a community, it's important for us to not only serve ourselves, but to serve and lift up others. And what's key to that is that we received resources to work together. And I think that's part of the point around moving forward and having communities of colors work together. There have to be resources to be able to do that. There aren't, unfortunately, a lot of people out there, like my father, who can step away from his day job to do this work, right? It requires resources in order to do that. I also want to lift up just very quickly through my film work. I've been working with a national civil rights coalition that includes groups like the Urban League, Race Forward, the Advancement Project, Asian Pacific Islander American Health Forum, and they are funded by the Kellogg Foundation to work together on civil rights issues. And so I really think that in this conversation, as far as like tangible things that can be and need to be done in order to address this issue that we all have in common around hate, right? There have to be resources put forward for us to do it together. And so, and I'll just end with this, is that we are, you know, at the local level, some of my community members are here from Japantown, and we recently got resources from the city and county to work together, right, to address safety issues in Japantown. That was the first time we've gotten resources to do that since in over 100 years, okay? Japantown's been here for a long, long time. We have never gotten resources to be able to do that, right? And so that was the first time. I want to lift up my friend Alice Kawahatsu, who is also involved where religious communities in the Asian American Black community are coming together to work together. So I just wanted to lift up some of these examples, right, as ways, tangible ways that I think at the federal level, amongst private funders, that we really have to start to rethink, rather than make communities compete with each other for resources, that we think about ways where we can support them to work together.
Thank you.
And I'll end there.
Thank you, John. So powerful. Ooh, we have 5 minutes. We might stretch it just a little bit because we have some really important messages from our other speakers too. So Jenny, I'm going to turn it over to you. CCC has been such an important cultural anchor and a facilitator in terms of lifting up artists and the role of arts and culture. And just would love for you to talk about that work, and also CMAC, if you can, as well.
Sure. Thank you, Sin, and thank you to CAA and Stop AAPI Hate for and the TAF for convening us together, and thank you and welcome to Chinatown Representative Meng and to the Chinese Culture Center. I'm not only the executive director of the Chinese Culture Center, but I'm also the program chair for the Chinatown Media and Arts Collaborative, CMAC. It's 6 leading organizations in Chinese American organizations in civil rights, arts and culture, housing, to dream of a better future for Chinatown. And I want to thank your work on the National Museum of APA Center. CMAC established at Jonda Square. It's on 800 grant, and it's the region's API's first contemporary art, media, and cultural hub, and to uplift social equity and inclusion with these different narratives. And I just want to maybe echo what some of all of our speakers here today, and I'm just so honored to be part of this esteemed panel, and thank you for inviting us. I think COVID has really exposed the inequities that have been with us for a long time, and it woke all of our communities up. And anti-Asian hate reminded us about the institutional racism that is present with us today, and impacts all Asian Americans. And we also learned through our intersectional work that art is so powerful with, is that arts, creativity, and artists are a critical and essential part of community building. And in order for our communities to move forward, to build power, to recover and heal, arts need to be an essential part of our recovery and our future. And I just want to share a little bit about the arts and social change. Our work is very intersectional. It's collaborative with many of the partners that are here today. And I think the live stream people have some slides that they'll be looking at right now, because I always like to have art speak for itself. And I just want to highlight that at the table you have a few materials. This is Alive and Present, Cultural Belonging. This was commissioned during the pandemic, when all of us were isolated, as a way to remind ourselves why our communities are important, about our culture and our place. And I want to also ground people in this room in the Chinese Culture Center, because a year ago, and Supervisor Connie Chan spoke about this, the community hosted Reverend Jesse Jackson and the youth in a conversation reminding us of the lessons of the murder of Vincent Chin and how the impacts and how it continues to impact all of us today with the murder of George Floyd. And 2 years ago, in the public park outside right here in Chinatown, artists and community leaders and community members came together to take a stand and for Chinatown to stand up and in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. And 200 people showed up to, and this is the cover photo for this, 200 people showed up to participate in art and creativity. And in the same park a year ago, after the Atlanta shootings, we all came together for a rally and to also to send love letters to Chinatown or to Atlanta. And this is how the community came together to heal. And also a year ago, we collaborated in the Bayview in a neighborhood that between an African American and an Asian American artist, and to be able to build solidarity with diverse youth. And I want to be able to point out these different examples. And just this year, in commemoration of the 140th anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act and the 40th anniversary of Vincent Chin, there was an arts procession out on this bridge right here to name the 140 names of the people who have been impacted by the Chinese exclusion, that it's still present with us today, and that we're still experiencing trauma, as Russell has mentioned, but to also give our ancestors a blessing and to be able to move on from that trauma. And I think that's what arts play a big role in healing, and for our to give hope, and for our communities to come together. And I do want to close by speaking a little bit about CAPAC, and I want to invite people to go see the mural. It was commissioned for the first API Contemporary Arts Festival that was in Chinatown. It was multi-site. It had projections, activations, and interactive art. And a mural was commissioned on that occasion with two multi-generational artists, one in her 20s and one in her 70s. And they're both from Chinatown's SROs. And the SROs, the single resident occupants, make up the bulk of the affordable housing here in Chinatown. And these two artists from our SROs are able to showcase the vibrancy of our community, but also it depicted the family living cheek to cheek in SROs and the difficulty of that. And there was a tiger that looked back and saw where we were in the Chinese exclusion period, but also looked forward to the future that is hopeful. And I want to be able to uplift not just Chinatown and Asian Americans, but uplift all of the small arts organizations and talented API artists that are committed to social change and are part, but have been historically under-resourced because of cultural inequities. And this is part of this narrative shift that we all need to be a part of. And arts need to be part of the social equity, the connectedness, the economic vitality of our communities. And they can be more proactive, and they can do so much more with resources. So I just really want to thank you for being here, Representative Meng, and for your time and everybody here.
Thank you. So the question is, what do we do when harm does happen? How can we do a better job providing support for victims and survivors, for communities? And CAA is really proud to be part of a coalition called Coalition for Community Safety and Justice with Sarah Wan's group, Chinatown Youth Center, and Chinese Progressive Association with Shasan. And so we are going to talk about, or hear from Sarah, who was able to join us from her other event, about their really important wraparound victim services and probably equally important, the work that they're doing with young people.
Thank you, Sin. Thank you for having me. Sorry for being late. Just to let you know, the sun came out today, so please enjoy Chinatown. There's multiple events in Chinatown. There's a public safety fair on Pacific and Stockton, and there's a food tasting event for Chinatown Showcase at Waverly Place. So just to let you know, that's what's going on in Chinatown. But that's just something else that CYC does. I think this is very important to me to come here today to really speak about our experience working with victims for the past 18 months. We were really feel very honored to be able to work in partnership with Chinese for Affirmative Action, Chinese Progressive Association, Chinatown Community Development Center together to really look for not only providing like short-term support to the victim, but also community outreach, safety workshops, and also looking into like and also longer-term solutions to really how to tackle violence in the community, and especially related to hate. I want to focus on about CYC victim service a little bit. We basically kind of building the plane while it's flying when all this incident happened about 18 months ago. We were able to leverage all our case manager within our staff to actually start providing victim support services. And by doing that for the past 18 months, serving over 110 AAPI victims just in San Francisco. Just to let you know, not all of them are classified as hate crime or hate incident, but they all involve AAPI victims that they have nobody really served in the past. I think what we have seen, there's definitely a lack of coordinations with the city department, how a victim experienced from reporting crime to when they transfer the case to go through the legal system, and also how they actually receive other community resources to support for their healing and for their recovery. We find many of our victims have a hard time to navigate the system because of the lack of language access. Many of them think that as long as we have a staff who can speak Cantonese or Mandarin, that will be done. But we have a very diverse community. Even though I have staff who speak Cantonese, Mandarin, Tagalog, Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Thai, I still have challenge when I face victims who might be like only speak Mongolian dialect. I will have to reach out even partners in the East Bay, service provider, to see if they could have a translator to actually help us to serve those victims. The other thing is the system is actually very hard to understand. When they report a crime, first of all, they need to have the trust in the government system. Many of our constituents that they have trauma in the past, they do not have that trust to government. They feel or they refuse to report crime. So we do not know the data, and then they cannot seek help. So with CYC, with our collaborative, we do a lot of community outreach, especially ethnic media outreach, so that they know even if they don't make the report to the police, they still should come forward for victim support services. The other part is that when they navigate the system, no one can really tell them, explain to them how to go through the system. After make the police report, what will happen? When will I know what's the next step? Okay, when they transfer to the district attorney's office, what will also happen to me? If I'm going to subpoena to court, so if I'm going to skip my job, is there going to be any compensation? How long will be the wait? A lot of time the court might cancel like 2 hours before the event while they're already calling like off from their workplace, and they find it very cumbersome, and then a lot of time they really don't feel like there's justice that really served them throughout the process. So there's really no clear explanation or transparency of the system, what is going to happen to them as a victim, even though they're willing to come out to be the witness. And lastly, they also do not have access to a lot of other services, including mental health services. In the past, unless it's a crisis like a homicide incident, they might get crisis response from the Department of Public Health. But for someone that might get like racial slur or like they get really fear but not like seriously bodily injury, nobody will reach out to them for any mental health services. But many of them actually being traumatized by this event and they fear to go out. I have so many elders, they used to do neighborhood walk, they cannot do anymore after the pandemic. Not only they isolate from home, they can't even enjoy the open space. So it's very important how we can coordinate all the system together to provide service to the victim. And I think it really takes community together to bring it up. Even for CYC, I have case manager to do intake with the client. We have to reach out to a mental health service provider to connect them to a bilingual therapist right away. Because otherwise, then they have to go through the system to verify are they insurance like eligible, or actually how many sessions would they be qualified, or they have to go through a lot of stigma and a lot of other like barrier in order to receive the mental health services, which will really harm them not only in the short term but also in the long term. So, and then the other thing is for the legal advice that we know that we also have to partner a community legal service agency to really provide them options, second opinion, possibly civil claim opportunities to offer them these services also in language to them. So to us, it's not only advocate the coordination at the government level, but also how we all community come together to really bring the service to the victim. And I know I speak really fast. I'll have one more minute and I'll be done. I think the other thing is I've been in this service for 25 years. I started as actually a case manager working with very high-risk kids, especially in Chinatown. And what I'm seeing that a lot of time we only react when something happens. When there's only media attention that showcases like one incident, then suddenly there might be some resources that drop in, only maybe to a Chinese community for 1 year, and then afterwards it will be gone. There's never really a sustained resource development to help our community to continue to really tackle violence issue. And on top of that, from my experience doing street outreach and school outreach in the past, it will only work when we work across community, when we collaborate with Latinx community, when we collaborate with Black community, with our community allies. So we really represent solidarity, and when we actually reach out to the youth, they really see as a role model and how we can work together to resolve the violence. And this is really how we're going to deal with the root cause of the violence. And that's my part, and I know I have other partners, so Hassan will be next. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. So Shashan, I'm going to ask you to close us out and really address, I think, the fact that it's both interpersonal, institutional. We have to have holistic approaches, and when we say root causes, I'd love for you to just really elaborate on that.
Thanks, Sin. Yeah, so I just want to appreciate everyone on this panel. Oops, is this on? Can folks hear me? Just want to appreciate this opportunity, this really important panel conversation, Stop API Hate, the Asian American Foundation, CCC for hosting this event. And just to appreciate what Sarah just went through very, very fast for all of you, but I think it all kind of brought it home for us, like the amount of work and the complex layers it takes simply to tend to the harm that has been done, let alone what it takes to attend to and address the root causes and the systems that are driving the hate, the systems that are driving the inequities, the systems that are creating the conditions in which folks are acting out and lashing out against each other. So, my name is Shasan Liu. I'm the executive director of the Chinese Progressive Association. And for the last nearly 5 decades, we have been working to provide direct services, community education and outreach, and organizing to equip, Chinese immigrant working families and young people with the tools they need to be able to advocate for their community's well-being in solidarity with other communities of color, and that's been a tenet of CPA from the very beginning. And our community has experienced the anti-Asian racism and violence and hate in many ways, including the street harassment and the fear of leaving the house and the fear of going to school, but also in being relegated to low-wage jobs where they face verbal harassment and humiliation on a daily basis, in being, having the choice of living in an SRO versus living in with 3 other families in a crowded basement. Those are all ways in which the racism and inequities in our society play out. And so for us, we really want to lift up how the issues we face, anti-Asian violence and racism is not only interpersonal, it is absolutely systemic, and it is it actually is we're actually talking about white supremacy, racism, and systemic poverty and inequality that is what is driving the issues our communities face. And therefore, if that is all our collective understanding, it's been, I think the theme has come up in different parts of today, if that is our understanding that it's really about the root causes of inequality and racism, then the solutions absolutely have to be about how we come together across communities to tackle those root causes. And it feels more true now than ever before, especially in a place like San Francisco that has such, what was being lifted up by City Attorney David Chu and others, this dual history, right? Ground zero for the racism and exclusion and ground zero for the Asian American movement, right? And that work continues today. So, I also just want to name that we are very proud founding members, as Sarah mentioned, of the Coalition for Community Safety and Justice, which we're really trying to advance a model of showing how do we come together, organize ourselves first within the Asian American community locally around a holistic approach, ensuring there's comprehensive support for victims and survivors of crime, ensuring that our city systems and public infrastructure for responding to violence and hate is inclusive of our community's needs, and then investing in the long-term cross-racial healing and solidarity, which is the area that CPA leads. So I'm just going to share a quick story and then give some examples of the work that we've done to close us out with some tangible stuff. We have a member, Aline, who is, an immigrant from China. She was a school teacher, a public school teacher in China, but she immigrated to the U.S. in order to pursue a better education and future for her children, but found herself quickly that she was working those low-end jobs, dead-end jobs in the restaurants. She was living in an SRO, being asked to quarantine. When COVID hit, being told that she should isolate and quarantine, but she's living in a place where the bathroom is shared by 4 other families. Hearing endless conversations about the attacks on elders and the concerns for safety, and that actually Chinese people, no one cares about Chinese people, that in fact everyone's trying to take opportunity away from Chinese people, that Chinese people better stand up and defend ourselves and stick together, with no mention of what the context, the wider lens of what's really happening to other communities. And so if Aline was just on her own without a connection to a community organization and space for community conversations, it could take her down a certain path in terms of her analysis and her sense of solutions. But because she's a member of CPA, she was able to be part of the programming that we developed through the Coalition for Community Safety and Justice, including listening sessions, including cross-racial dialogues with other communities of color, and including a deep dive into what is restorative justice and what is the different ways that our communities experience harm and healing and accountability. And really just seeing that, I know that my time is up, but I just want to close with that the work to build long-term cross-racial solidarity and dialogue and healing is really hard. It is not like oh great, we're just gonna have a one, hold our hands and have one, nice event. It doesn't work like that. And the racial trauma and healing that has to happen for all of our different communities in the very different ways we've been impacted takes a lot of time and effort. But it's absolutely necessary, and it absolutely is effective when we have the resources and commitment to do so. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Shasad. I'll apologize to you later how you really had the least amount of time. So I noticed that the Representative Meng's staff are very nervous because she has a flight to catch. So is there still time to do a photo? So what I want to do is, in the interest of time, close out the program by asking you to please join me in giving our roundtable guest speakers a round of applause. And we want to thank you so much for being here today, for being a part of the conversation. And this is going to be a continued conversation and continued action together. So we're going to close here. And if you can join us, we'd love to take a group photo with Representative Meng. Okay, thank you.